everyone, welcome back to the Library of Parthos. My name is Sarah, and today I'm going to be sharing a little bit about my reading habits, what they looked like in the past, how they kind of got interrupted and I kind of lost the enjoyment of reading for a while, and how I kind of got back into it, and the books that made me love reading again. So you're probably going to be like, Sarah, that's a really stupid thing to think. And I'm going to be like, yeah, I know. And then you're going to be like, Sarah, you're wrong. And I'm going to be like, yeah, I know. So I had, let me just start a little bit at the beginning. So I have always loved to read. I was one of those kids who got in trouble in class for reading too much because I was reading when I wasn't supposed to. You know what I mean? It didn't happen often. I was a pretty good kid, but there were a handful of times. Anyway, I had really good reading habits when I was a kid, when I was in high school, as a teenager. I was reading all the time. I read a variety of books, but of course my favorite was fantasy. It always has been. I watched The Lord of the Rings when I was like 10 and instantly became obsessed. That led into a love of Harry Potter and just, you know, all things fantasy from there on out. So anyway, when I was in like middle school, high school, even in like elementary school, I read all of the Harry Potter books. I read all of the Chronicles of Narnia, and then, you know, a couple standalones here or there, or like tried to get into a series. And then I read all of the Eragon books. I totally read all of them and didn't just skim the last one. And then, so this is where you're gonna be like, Sarah, that's really dumb. After that, I was kind of like, okay, I've read all of the good fantasy books. There are no more. So I guess I'll just read other things. So I had somehow like convinced myself, and like nobody told me this, nobody said this, I had just like convinced myself that there were no other good fantasy books out there. I knew there were others, but I just thought like, well, I'm done with all the good ones. Like I've read what needs to be read. Let's move on. And like I read other stuff too. Like I read other fiction. Of course I read like historical fiction. I love a lot of the classics. Like I read a variety, but I kind of like, I don't know, I was like, okay, I'm done with fantasy because like I've, you know, been there, done that, it's over. But like my love of fantasy never went away. Once I got to college then, you know, I didn't have a lot of time to read for enjoyment, and that just wasn't what I was doing. I was either like studying, doing like some sort of club or activity, or working. So I didn't really have any time to read for enjoyment. And again, I was like, oh, there's no other good fantasy out there, so like why bother? And I did read a couple of other things here and there. Like I read some other classics. I read a couple of mysteries. Like I was still trying, but my reading habits just weren't what they were when I was in high school. And then even when I got out of college, I was like, okay, I'm an adult now, so I have to read nonfiction everything. So, which is great. Like I love nonfiction too, but again, just I, you know, was reading only because I felt like I had to, because I wanted to continue learning and growing and reading, and I just felt like that was the thing to do. In conversations with friends over the years, I would always say like, you know, I used to read all the time, I just haven't really found anything that I'm into. I would love to like get really into a good book again. And they would throw out suggestions, but I would hear them and be like, okay, that sounds a bit much for me. Those conversations would keep happening. Like I would say like, oh man, yeah, I really miss reading. Like I haven't really read a good book that I couldn't put down in X amount of years. I wish I could find something really good. And my friends would say, have you tried this? It's about this, you know, very complicated magic system. Like, okay, it's been a while, so that seems like a lot. So anyway, these conversations kept happening, and then Booktube. So in watching various booktubers talk about what they're reading, I found books that I was interested in picking up, added them to my Amazon list, which was a start because there was no list before that. A lot of them are still on there, but hey, progress, right? And it also helped explain some of those really complicated magic systems that were getting recommended to me. So I had background knowledge to go into those things. I knew which ones would interest me, which ones I could handle at the time. So Booktube is a truly wonderful place. Anyway, all of those recommendations, the list just kept growing. Watching Booktube just became part of my weekly routine. We took a trip to Barnes & Noble and I said, you know what? I'm just gonna do it. I'm gonna get one of those books on my list and I'm going to read it. Like, we're gonna start today. So as we were browsing Barnes & Noble, I kept striking out. Like, I couldn't find the books that I really wanted to read. And I finally came across one and I was like, you know what, this is it, because I couldn't find the other ones. This one's right here, like, I have to do this. That book is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. That was the book that kind of reignited the spark. Oddly enough, not really a fantasy book. So I bought the book and then, of course, it sat on my bookshelf for quite a while. And I think what made me pick it up actually is that we were remodeling our house. So a lot of the rooms in our house were just ripped up because we were getting new hardwood installed and painting and all of that stuff. And there were a handful of nights where our bedroom was being worked on. So there were, it had what we fondly called the death floor, where, you know, all of the hardwood and old flooring had been pried off and it was just wood with nails sticking out of it. So there were several nights where we couldn't sleep in our bedroom and we had to sleep in one of the guest bedrooms, which didn't have a TV. So I was like, okay, I guess I need to take a book because I'm gonna need something to do before I fall asleep. So finally decided, okay, I bought that Mexican Gothic book because I was super interested in it. It was highly recommended by a lot of people. I should probably start reading it. And over the course of the next few days, as our bedroom was getting remodeled and I didn't have anything else to do, I finished the book and I absolutely loved it. So I'll kind of pause my storytelling here and just give a quick synopsis of that story. It is about a young socialite who, her cousin writes her a letter and kind of says like, hey, I know I married this guy, like the super wealthy guy, but things are really weird here. Could definitely, you know, use some help. I'd like to come home. So she goes to help her cousin and discovers this very interesting mystery surrounding the family, the house, all of the stuff. Definitely more on the horror side, which isn't my usual go-to. And there were parts at the end that were just kind of grotesque, but the story itself, absolutely loved it. It was very reminiscent of like Daphne du Maurier style writing. And Rebecca is another favorite of mine. So I was very happy with the vibe of the whole thing. So after I finished Mexican Gothic, I was like, okay, I would like to read another book very similar to this. If I can find something that's more into the fantasy realm, because shockingly, there are other good fantasy books besides Harry Potter, the Chronicles of Narnia, and what was the other one I said? Oh, Eragon. There are other books and there are current fantasy authors. I just somehow didn't know about them. So anyway, I was like, okay, so I would like a fantasy book. There wasn't a lot of romance in Mexican Gothic. It was very, I don't even want to say subtle because it wasn't subtle. It was just very brief, but kind of got that happy ending at the end of the book. So I wanted fantasy and I wanted some element of romance. Those were the things that I either really liked about Mexican Gothic or knew that I wanted. Like, that would keep my interest. So I did a lot of searching, watched a lot of Booktube, made lists, upon lists, and on almost all of them there was kind of a few common books, and so I decided to finally pick up one of them. You probably can figure out what it is. The shirt, the candles, like a lot of the stuff behind me probably doesn't give it away at all, but of course that is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. Absolutely. I know there are some differing opinions about this series, the characters, this book in particular, and I know I have one friend who is waiting to read this book, so I definitely don't want to give any spoilers, but I mean, it's ACOTAR. Like, if you don't know the plot, I'm sure you can find a video somewhere of somebody talking about the plot. Absolutely loved this series. This was exactly what I was looking for. This was exactly what I needed to get me back into reading, into the fantasy genre in particular. And also I read this in December, and I don't know, like the whole series in December, there's just something really nice about reading this series, particularly like the second book, when it's snowing outside. This was really what did it for me then. I was hooked, and of course now kind of knowing what I wanted, what I was looking for, what I enjoyed, it made it a lot easier to find other books, hence these stacks behind me, and the long list of things that I have yet to read. But yeah, that is kind of what got me back into reading Mexican Gothic and then ACOTAR, and here we are. So I'm super grateful for those books, for those authors, for all of the booktubers who create content, for Instagram, of course, Goodreads, all of those places, for being a really great community for readers. Because as I said, like when I was a kid, I read all of the time. Like it was just something that I couldn't imagine not doing. And then to then be an adult and not have an interest in reading anymore was like really sad. So I'm so glad that this community exists, to help crazy people like me who somehow thought that they had exhausted their options. I would love to hear some of your favorite books. Fantasy, if that is a genre that you enjoy reading, if not, just your favorite book in general, because of course I would like to keep adding to my list, and you know, it's never ending. That is the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.